We're in lesson 5 of module 1. It's our final lesson for this module and we're looking at compassion. As I've said previously, this was a game changer for me in my worship leading, and I know it will be for you too. And we're going to discover why in this lesson. Let's have a look at what we'll discover. First, we're going to look at the compassionate leader. Then we're going to look at what compassion changes. We'll look at a modern view of following, and we'll end by applying this to our own leadership. And this lesson is for everyone on the team. Compassion is an amazing motivator, and it's essential if we're going to stand in front of people, leading, playing, singing, or talking. It's another leadership why that changes how we do things. So here's my question to you. What are you moved with when you look out at the crowd that is gathered each week in your church? I really want us to think about this. I've been part of many worship teams, and I'm sad to admit that it was quite common to hear members of the team say things like, "The congregation was so dead this morning," or "What a mission it was to get the church to sing," or variations of this nature. And I found myself thinking or saying similar things at times. Mark chapter 6 tells of two of Jesus' most well-known miracles: feeding the 5,000 with 2 fish and 5 loaves, and walking on water. Right before these, there's a verse that is easily skipped over in the familiarity of the story, but it holds a powerful lesson. Verse 34 tells us that Jesus saw the crowds and was moved with compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. One line, so simple, but so profound. Many times I've been guilty of trying to get the crowd to understand, like I was somehow better than them. I'd even get upset if they wouldn't respond passionately to a new song or something I shared. And I'd think, worship could be so amazing, but they just don't get it, they're missing it. But when I read this verse from Mark, I realize the thing that was missing was not passion in the crowd, but compassion in me. I needed to be a more compassionate leader. Compassion makes us see people as individuals. It makes us ask the right questions. We'll see this later in our next module, which is all about preparation. Compassion is the foundation of service. If all we're doing is trying to get the crowd to act a certain way out of obedience to us, we're not leading, we're not serving, we're not meeting a need, and we're certainly not influencing any change beyond our 30 minutes on a Sunday. Leading is not getting people to do things, but it's serving in a way that leaves them better off. The same verse tells us that in response to being moved with compassion, Jesus taught them many things and miracles followed. When we're moved with compassion for the crowd, we don't want to leave them the same. We seek to meet their needs by God's power through us. The disciples in the story tell Jesus to send the people away for food. Instead, Jesus blesses 5 loaves and 2 fish and feeds the entire crowd. The compassionate leader wants to see people flourish. We want to see them flourish, and we expect God to show Himself strong towards them. Our leadership is loaded with lessons that encourage and build them up. Compassion for the crowd will raise your expectations to see more of God's power for His glory and the good of others. Having compassion will change the way you prepare each week. It will change the songs you choose and the way you speak. It will enliven the prayers that you pray and the way that you lead. Believe that God has you right where you need to be, surrounded by that team, in that church, with those people. Instead of praying for God to change them, pray for a compassion in your heart for them to rise. Leading with compassion will certainly bring change, first in our hearts, then in the way that we lead, and that change in us changes the way people follow. A change happens in our hearts because we notice people in the crowd. We want to serve them. We want to see them grow in understanding, and we want to see them draw near to God, and we're willing to do what we must to bring everybody with. This will change the way that you prepare for a Sunday. It'll change the way you arrive at a rehearsal, or pray for those gathered, or anything else. When our heart is moved, we never just go through the tasks. So there's a change in the way that we lead. We're more inclusive. We're less hurried. We want to hear from God and see Him move on behalf of His people, not just to get through a rehearsal or a Sunday set. And people want to follow because they know you care. And they're expecting to see what God will do because they know you've taken time to seek Him for His best every time you get up to lead. I've corrected some of my thinking over the years. We don't need to get people to worship. People want to worship with understanding and in spirit and in truth. People want to connect with God, but they're looking for someone to help them do that. And as worship leaders, we have the privilege to play a part. This is a big responsibility for us, but compassion sees God's best in people, and it motivates us to lead well every single week. The idea of following has evolved somewhat in today's digital world. Traditionally, you followed a set of instructions from an authority. But I like the modern take on following. On social media, we follow people who inspire us. People we want to hear more from. People we admire and really seem to have our best at heart. This shift is helpful for us as worship leaders. When we genuinely want to see people connect with God, it permeates everything we do, from the first note we play to the last prayer prayed. People are inspired to worship and come along on the journey of discovering God. This is the type of leadership I want to provide whoever God brings on my path, and trust that as we draw near to God with expectation and understanding, that He draws near to us with revelation, love, and power. Now, this lesson hasn't been a long one. In preparing this, I wondered if I needed to add some more points to draw it out. But actually, the lesson is simple. It's the truth of it that'll change lives. I haven't put this course together to impress you with my knowledge of worship. I'm sharing simple, tried and tested truths that'll take your worship leading to a new level. The power comes in application and in seeking God for compassion for those He has surrounded us with. So in this lesson, we've covered our response to the crowd, the definition of a compassionate leader, and the essential change that compassion causes in us and others. The personal application for you is our question that we opened with. What do you see when you look at the crowd? Now, this is a great question to discuss with your team because it changes the culture of your team. In your workbook, I've included some other scriptures that will help shift our thinking and our language about the crowd. Use these as prayer inspiration as you ask God to give you compassion for the crowd. In Module 4, about maximizing participation, I give you more practical ways to connect with the crowd. So in this module, we've spoken about bringing our relationship with God into our worship leading and passing on lessons that God may teach us for those who follow us. We've looked at creating ownership in people so that they understand the purpose behind the tasks. We've seen how being authentic helps us engage with people and draw them into worship. And we've spoken about how confidence in God means we're consistent in our leading. And compassion is what brings it all together. You're only leading if people are following. Module 1 has laid a good foundation for us. It's essential to understand the why before we dive into all the how-tos, which is why Module 1 is all about the kind of leadership we want to provide. In Module 2, we start getting into the practical how-tos of worship leading, and we're starting with preparation. I'll see you in the next module.